rise for the Pledge of Allegiance.
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
This is to advise those present.
We have no sound
Video.
on here.
Yeah, there you go.
So sorry. Better? This is to advise those present at this meeting of the Board of Education of the Pinelands Regional School District in the County of Ocean that adequate notice of this meeting was provided in accordance with the Open Public Meeting Act. The notice has been posted in the Board of Education office, junior high school, and high school buildings. The notice was also mailed to the press of Atlantic City and filed with municipal clerks of Bass River, Eagleswood, Little Egg Harbor Township, and the Borough of Tuckerton. Do we need to do another roll call, Nick?
Yep, Mr. Williams. Here. Ms. Paklakua.
Yes, remote.
Thank you. Ms. Chambers.
Yes, remote.
Thank you. Ms. Palladino is marked absent. Mr. Rossetti.
Here.
Ms. Harper.
Here.
Mr. Dalio.
Here.
Ms. Hannadel.
Yes.
Ms. Hannadel's participating virtually, and Mrs. McVeigh.
Yes.
All right, we're in session at 6:06.
All right, so before we approve the agenda, we need to approve an amendment to the agenda?
That is correct. So we need a motion to amend the agenda to approve new business item 9B1, withholding of an increment. Can I have a motion?
Motion.
Second.
Second.
All those in favor of amending the agenda, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, so now we could take over the next step to approve the amended agenda.
All right, we need a motion to approve the amended agenda, please.
Motion.
Second.
Okay, all those in favor of approving the amended agenda as presented, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That motion carries.
All right, we need a motion to please approve the minutes of the regular session of September 23rd, special meeting of October 6th, and executive session of September 23rd.
Motion.
Second.
Who was that?
It was me and somebody over there.
Who was the second?
Rachel.
I said it and someone over there, but I don't know who.
Okay. All right, all in favor of approving the minutes as presented, please say aye.
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 All those opposed, say nay. Thank you, Mr. Williams. Your abstention is noted. That motion carries.
All right, moving on to item number 7, the report of the superintendent. I'll give you Dr. McCooley.
All right, I am going to take this off just to do my update. So I want to make sure everybody at home can hear clearly. So first, we held a Q&A session some time ago, and it went very well. I want to thank all the participants, both in Little Egg and Pinelands, for all your positive feedback, as well as questions that you asked to really help get some direct information out to the public. Thank you for your time, and thank you for participating. We had our first parent liaison committee meetings last evening. One was held at Little Egg at 4:30 and at 6 o'clock here at Pinelands. The group is absolutely amazing. Many parents I have never met before or seen before, and they really brought a lot to the table, some great input in terms of communication, and some really positive feedback that we've been receiving in regards to the manner in which that we've been delivering the hybrid and virtual instruction. And as I said, a lot of good suggestions and feedback from the parent perspective. So I think it was very helpful, and in some cases, turning some of the negativity that's been out there in the right direction. The school reopening committee met today at 4 o'clock via Zoom. We have a very large group that participates in that, on that committee, and some key things that came out of that, we shared the data that was collected in both districts regarding the parents wanting their students back full-time. And it was about 80% in each district that said yes, if we provided protective barriers, that they would feel comfortable sending their child back 5 days a week. In terms of the staff, they do not feel the same. About 30% do not feel safe having the students back 5 days a week, even with barriers. Some of the things that came out of that committee meeting today as well were that there's a concern that we have an increase in exposure cases. We have not had positive cases that have affected us greatly. However, we have had staff members that were exposed to others with COVID that now have to quarantine for quite some time. And if that happens, we have to find adequate staff to deliver instruction. So that is a concern that it seems to be on the rise in Ocean County and in this area. Some other things, we have been trying to bring back gradually some of our at-risk populations, such as ESL, some of our special ed students, our preschool disabled has been coming back full-time. And there is a concern that students and staff members are going to travel over the November break and come back with some COVID issues. So the consensus of the school reopening committee was to wait until December when our plan expires and then evaluate it at that time. And if we were to bring students back full-time in January, we will have the barriers then to provide the additional protective equipment. Just trying to see if I missed anything. We were also concerned about busing issues if we brought staff back full-time, or excuse me, students back full-time. So Nick Tallarico is going to be working with Patty and surveying our drivers, and just to get some information from them on their feeling of having more students on the bus at one time. I will be sending information out to parents regarding the update from the school reopening committee, as well as reminders about the November break and quarantining if need be, and that if our staff has to quarantine, we may have to go virtual for 2 weeks because of a lack of staff. Okay, the next thing I have is I'd like to point out and thank Ms. Colello for meeting with me. I know Mr. Rossetti has been for quite some time asking about an ROTC program. It's very expensive. However, with the help of Ms. Colello, we were able to start a club, and thank you to the board for supporting this. We're able to start a club at this point, and we're hoping to transition to a full program in the future. I did fill the application out, as I explained to the board, and sent that on to Fort Dix, hoping to be one of the participants in an ROTC program in the future. As Ms. Colello explained, it's good to get the ball rolling, and then we can always look at funding and go to the board at that point and plan in the budget in the future to fund that program. So thank you to her for that, and we're really excited about having that club. And then lastly, I do have a presentation, so if Tech would not mind putting that up, I'm going to go over this with everyone. So while we're setting that up, I'm going to start the presentation, and then Mr. Brown is going to pick up at the end and give his half of it. Okay, so as promised, I'm going to be giving an administrative cost analysis, and this is reflective of the previous outlay of the administration before I came, and as it is now with many of the shared services that we've implemented. So if you look to the left of your screen, you'll see the admin configuration prior to me coming in 2017, where you had a superintendent full-time, you had other full-time positions such as a director of curriculum and instruction, director of special education, director of special services, a BA, supervisor of math and science, supervisor of ELA and social studies, supervisor of athletics, principal, and 4 assistant principals. And then if you look to your right, you're going to see the difference in all the shared services. Obviously, when the figurine is in half, it is a shared service. And in some cases, it's not fully shared. For example, Mr. Baronato is shared. However, he's only overseeing math and science. So it's not a complete 50% share. But you'll see a shared superintendent, shared director of special education, shared BA, shared supervisor of special education, supervisor of math and science is now shared. We have a shared business administrator, and I want to point out too that the business office is not only shared with Little Egg, it's shared with Bass River. So they are split between 3 districts. We have 1 principal now in the high school with 3 assistant principals, and if you look at the bottom, across the bottom of both, we've just shifted over. Now the junior high, since they only have 2 grade levels, there's a principal and an assistant principal. So we kind of shifted one over to the high school because there's more students. But if you count up the number of bodies, there are less administrators and as there were in 2017, and you're going to see the cost layout on the next screen. I don't want to go off this yet. I'm going to give you another minute to look at it, and I apologize. Ms. Fresca, would you mind doing me a favor? Sure. Could you give the pink folders out to the board members that are here? And I can send this to the board members that are virtual as well. I'm sorry, I forgot. And I do have extra if anyone in the public does care to have one. Ms. Fresca will be popping around. All right, I'm going to go to the next screen now, please. So I do have handouts. I know this is very hard to see, and you can refer to your handout. It's in your folder. But basically, across the top, what we have is the administrative configuration starting in 2016-17, and if it never changed, and all of these people stayed in their positions, we calculated their salaries through 2020, 2021. If someone were to leave, such as Dr. Banks did not stay with us, we imputed a 2% increase each year, which is being very generous, or not very generous, because oftentimes there's more of an increase. But with everyone at the top, if they stayed, the current configuration stayed as is, with their increases, all the way to the right, you can see the total, little over 1.8 million. If you go a little bit lower, that is the current configuration and the current salaries of the administration, totaling a little over 1.4 million. So there is a savings of over $400,000. The savings in Little Egg Harbor was not as significant. It was a little over $100,000 because, as you'll see at Pinelands, we eliminated administrative positions. One other thing I want to point out is that the shared superintendent salary is a little bit over $94,000. That's what you pay me as the superintendent. Just to put that into perspective, if you look at the bottom of the screen, there is an elective teacher that in 2018, with coaching and another extra, made his per diem was $559. That's what he would make per day, and that's based on 183 days. My per diem that you're paying me at Pinelands for 220 days, which feels like 365, is $395. So you can see that comparison. Is there a reason why it went off the screen?
It's back up.
Okay. All right, because there's more.
Yeah, we lost it.
Yeah, they don't have it at home. It's not on their screen.
It was. We just lost it.
Okay. Nope.
Dr. McCooley, if you'd like to share it with me, I can share my screen and post it up for you for the Zoom members.
I think it's coming back, John. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, good.
All right. Sorry about that, Karen. So
No worries.
I know that the members here have this in front of them, and you don't on the virtual board members. Do you have any questions about this slide in particular?
Yes, I do. Pat,
Yep.
the per diem rate, the first figure is teacher. Did you say that it did or it didn't include stipends?
It includes coaching, and at the time, teachers were doing home instruction.
Okay. All right, so that was the per diem. And the second figure, the 395, was your salary? Is
My
that what
per-
it was?
my
So
per-
it's
my
the
per diem.
our half of
Yes.
your salary.
Yes.
So what it doesn't include is the other half for a total.
Right, and that is for 220 days, not 183.
Okay, what's the other half, like that Little Egg per diem? What was your per diem for Little Egg?
$395.
Okay, so it's the same, she's cutting
Yes,
half.
yep.
So then that would be totaled for almost 800 per diem then?
Yes, if you took both districts, but what Pinelands is paying me is $395 per diem.
Thank you.
Other questions about this slide? Kat, we can't hear you, Kim, you're muted.
I guess you can't talk about other superintendents, but do we know, can you remind us what the average superintendent gets per school district? Isn't it like 160?
Much higher than that.
Yeah.
So I think at one point I sent the board that comparative. I can send that again because it really breaks it down in regards to enrollment and what average salaries are. So I can send that again so you can see that comparative.
Might just be good for everybody.
Yep.
But I think it was clear, I think the point is that if we were to have our own superintendent, not shared, it would be much more than $98,000 a year. We can just see what we've paid our superintendents in the past.
And the point is that she's done a lot more, which is to create this whole shared service without any regionalization happening. So we've done it. She's done it on her own, and we're saving $400,000.
Well, we're going to get to that next. Thanks, Kim. All right, as I said, if you're home and you don't have a copy of this, I will share this with you as soon as possible. All right, if you can go to the next slide, please. So I know the question comes, you know, you're sharing yourself, you know, what's getting accomplished with all these shared services. So the first part is if you can please click annual evaluation. All right, not sure why that's not working. We can go to, is it because you're logged in as you and not me?
Probably.
All right, so can you make me a collaborator and I'm going to share my screen? Just make me a co-host.
Dr. McCooley, you're now a co-host.
Thanks, John. I'm going to share my
You're welcome.
screen. John, can you see that?
Yes.
Okay. All right. So, still not working. We'll go to the next one. Annual evaluation is this link would go to what the board gets each year when they do my evaluation. And in that folder are multiple folders tied to standards and goals. And there's a multitude of information in there that the board receives and that they use to determine if I accomplished my goals for the year and how I'm doing in regards to the standards that are set forth to a superintendent. The other one is in your packet, and this is going to be, this actually aligns very well with what I was just explaining, so it's the same thing. It's in your packet, and this is an ongoing document that I'm going to be adding to. And what I did was I took each standard that is what I'm evaluated on as a superintendent, and I put evidence of that. So you can see, this is just 2018 to 2020. As you scroll through, these are all the things that are being accomplished in the district and in my role as superintendent. And as I said, I'm going to share this with you, and I'm also going to be adding to this throughout the school year. So at the end of this year, when the board or whomever says, well, what was accomplished this year, it's in black and white and it's documented. So we have 6 standards, and all the evidence of it is on the right-hand side. So you can go through this on your own. It's in your packet, and if you're not here, I'm going to be sharing this with you.
Thank you.
Okay, and now I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Brown.
Thanks, Dr. M. I wanted to briefly touch on some notes on the budget process. Remind members of the public that the budget process begins for the administration and the staff now. There's a budget action plan on the agenda for approval, and after the administrators submit their budgets sometime in mid-December, we will start, the business office and the finance committee will start to develop a budget for the 21-22 school year. And at the March meeting of the Board of Education, we'll present a tentative budget for approval. At the April meeting of the Board of Education, we'll approve a final budget. And so I want to remind everybody that when we create a budget, and our budget this year, including debt service, is just under $38 million, that budget gets divided by something called the apportionment formula. So because Little Egg Harbor students represent about 75% of the enrollment at the school, Little Egg Harbor residents pay about 75%. It's actually 74.69, but about 75% of the total budget. And then you see the corresponding percentages that each community pays as a sending district to Pinelands Regional. One of the things that we were looking at in the last couple of budget cycles was the bond referendum. We have new voter-approved debt service payments that impact the tax rate. The debt service payment in this budget cycle is $3.6 million, so a little under 10% of that total. We were also looking at lost revenues through the new School Funding Reform Act, and we also have really low reserve account balances. So our reserve accounts are our emergency reserve, maintenance reserves, and the like. And those accounts had very low balances, and in fact, we participated in a study of a survey of more than 50 districts and found that our reserve to budget ratio was in the bottom fifth. So just saying, for similarly sized districts, the amount of money we had in reserves was very low. So as part of this budget process that we're beginning now, we're going to review the budget history with the Finance Committee. And in the last budget cycle, the board chose to use bank cap to help offset some anticipated losses in revenues. And remember that this is a collaborative process. Not every member of the board agrees that we should go with bank cap, but we vote on it, and the majority of the members did. And we use bank cap, to be quite honest, because finding places to cut a public school budget is difficult. There are a lot of ideas what people have to trim, but to make substantial cuts to the budget requires a consensus from among the board. And typically that means the elimination of programs. And so there's been some discussion before about reducing the funding to, say, the school-based youth services program. And there's some members of the board that feel that's a good place to cut. And there's other members of the board who don't agree with that. But that's part of the budget process. That's why there's 9 members of the Board of Education. So in addition to that, it's very unlikely that school budgets get smaller. We have $14 million in salaries go to our the Education Association, which includes our teachers, our support staff, our the custodial maintenance grounds, everybody. So they're contracted to get raises of 2%. So those increases in and of themselves make it very unlikely that the budget ever goes backwards. The idea really is to spend at or above adequacy, and I've hyperlinked there something that gives some more information on how the Department of Education defines educational adequacy. And right now, the Pinelands budget is about $1.8 million over adequacy. Adequacy is the minimum amount of money that the state of New Jersey requires Pinelands Regional School District to spend on their public education. So if you look at the potential to cut the budget, it's limited to that 1.8, and that's a very significant amount of money, but we have to have in context what kind of cuts can be made. So, knowing that we're constrained by declining revenues, increasing debt service payments, I really commend the board for taking action to create savings. And they did that by entering into shared service agreements, consolidating. Over the last couple of years, our reserve balances have recovered substantially. I think last year with the COVID shutdown, we'll see a nice improvement in our reserve positions because the money that went unspent in the budget either gets put into a reserve account, which has a limit, or it gets rolled over into next year's budget. So we'll be able to roll over a significant amount of money into next year's budget that'll help the 21-22 budget process. And we're in better financial condition today than we were 2 years ago. I'm going to quickly go over some of our shared and coordinated agreements and programs. Dr. M touched on the shared administrative staff. Those tend to get more of attention, but where we really see a lot of effectiveness operationally is our shared professional services, which is our occupational therapy, physical therapy, speech language pathology. Our SEMI coordinator is shared among multiple districts. So most of these groups are shared with 5+ districts, all the Pinelands sending districts. Some of this stuff gets shared with LBI, although that employee might technically be a Little Egg employee. We also share a lot of operational services. We share janitorial, maintenance, buildings and grounds services with Bass River Township Board of Education. The cafeteria program, which is something that many board members, when I first got here in January 19, were concerned about the financial performance of the cafeteria program. Not only is that program has been consolidated into one single managerial spot out of Little Lake Harbor, but the program's produced a really nice profit last year, and it's also helped reduce the losses that the other school districts were experiencing. So Eagleswood Township and Bass River Township were losing $20,000 a year on the cafeteria program. Because we were able to consolidate cafeteria services, we cut the losses in those programs down to about $10,000 a year, which is still a lot of money, but when you have less than 200 children participating in a school lunch program, it's extremely difficult to be profitable. So the cafeteria program, I think, is a great example of where consolidating and sharing has been beneficial not only to Pinelands, but to all the sending districts in Pinelands. We also have shared technology staff. We used to have shared service agreements with Eagleswood. We still have shared service agreements with Bass River and Little Lake Harbor, so we utilize a lot of our technology staff around the regional school districts, which is helpful because we don't all need a network administrator. We could use one great network administrator and then a bunch of other guys that are really good technical and in the field reps. We also, for secretarial, my secretary, Cindy Barton, I don't have one in Pinelands because I don't need one. My secretary in Little Lake Harbor does an amazing job, and if she ever needs to switch hats and wear the Bass River Board of Education hat or the Pinelands Board of Education hat, she's very willing to do that. And so we share a lot of these operational services because we don't want to hire people to do those roles in these other districts, and they've been effective. We also coordinate a lot of programs and software, and these aren't necessarily big money makers, but it's really important operationally that you have some synergy between Genesis, which is our accounting, our payroll software, our purchasing software. Talent Ed is the software we use to post and hire for jobs and track applicants. ASOP is the program we use to track attendance for our staff. All of these programs are the same in each of those districts because we want to, as much as possible, utilize the same programs so that our staff, if they're shared, can jump in and out and have a level of familiarity in working with those programs. Also, and I think our assistant superintendents, Ms. Frasca and Mr. Baronato, did an awesome job this year when we had to go virtual and we had to pick up a bunch of new programs to help instruct our students and our staff virtually. We chose to utilize a lot of the same programs across those districts so that we could implement them easier and have more effective trainings with our staff. So I understand the question is, how do we evaluate shared services? And so Dr. M touched on the more than $400,000 in shared services to Pinelands. I think a fair question is that equitable to everybody? Go back to the apportionment. We're all rowing the same boat. 75, if we're saving $400,000 in Pinelands, chop it up. 75% of that is Little Lake Harbor savings. 12% of that is Tuckerton savings. So I would propose then to the board, and I'll speak to the auditor about getting a proposal from them to evaluate the shared services that we have in place the last couple of years and include the revenues and expenses that change hands between the Board of Education and include the cost to replace the shared positions. And we can discuss that with the respective budget and finance committees as we go into the budgets for the next school year. I think it's important for members of the Board of Education, for members of the administration, and for members of the public to see what's working and what's not. And I think a third-party accounting of that is something that could be really effective. I think that everybody needs to understand if we identify something that's not working, we need to make the changes during the upcoming budget cycle to address those things. But remember that all of these things aren't slam dunk, home run, everybody's saving a ton of money. And I'll go back to the professional services that we utilize, the speech language pathology or the physical therapy. Dr. Fontana, who's an employee that we share across multiple districts, who's an incredible physical therapist. Little Egg agrees to share her with all the other districts because these districts need access to a physical therapist to be able to provide service to their students. Little Egg's probably not making a ton of money on that. They're getting revenue from the other schools that offsets the cost of having her go there. And so it's not always about driving a big savings. A lot of the time this is about delivering a service to the students, to other districts in the area who can't afford to bring this staff in full-time on their own. But that's part of that evaluation, is understanding what's working and what's not, and working through the board's committees to create goals and expectations that we can then be accountable for going forward. One of the things I want to remind everybody is that shared services work in New Jersey. This is not an opinion of mine, although I agree with it. This is something that the state has demonstrated effectively over the last 10 years. Governor Murphy and the Department of Community Affairs have a ton of resources. I've hyperlinked here the shared services portal, which outlines some of those resources. And it's worth noting that the state is identifying more than $28 million in savings through shared services, both municipal and through boards of education, over the last 9 years. The next step in us in understanding whether or not shared services are beneficial or working for everybody is to study them more intensively. So back in January of 2020, Pinelands Regional and all the sending districts to Pinelands Regional agreed to apply for a grant called the LEAP grant. And this LEAP grant would be to study the feasibility of combining all 5 districts into a single unified school district. In August, the Pinelands Board of Education was awarded $90,000 to study the feasibility of unifying the Pinelands Regional School District. In November 2020, at next month's board meeting, we hope to appoint a firm to conduct this study. We ran an RFP. That RFP was, the deadline was yesterday. I think we had 4 responses to the RFP with varying price points and credentials. And so the next step for the committee there is to evaluate those responses and make a recommendation to the Pinelands Board of Education on which firm to select to conduct that study. I want to repeat, that's $90,000 that's not coming from taxpayer dollars. That's coming from a grant from the state of New Jersey. And I have to drive this home, guys. We are all rowing the same boat here. Saving money doesn't help me. This helps the Pinelands Board of Education, the Tuckerton Board of Education, the Little Egg Board of Education, the Bass River Board of Education, and the Eagleswood Board of Education. Those boards consist of 33 elected officials, and each one of those people has different ideas and objectives. Not any one of them by themselves is a board. They work in collaboration. The 9 members on this board collectively are the Pinelands Regional Board, and they vote on things, and the majority of those votes are the action that we take. And so I think what I can tell from working with Little Egg, with Bass River, and with Pinelands is that everybody's working together to find solutions that benefit our students. And with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Dr. McCooley. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Nick. That's all I had. I'm going to share my presentation out. If you didn't get to see some of the details of it, I know there's a lot in that. The board has it, and I will make sure that anyone in the public that needs it that's not here can have access to that.
All right, so items B, C, and D are available as, are we making any kind of presentation on
Nope.
those tonight?
No, they're just hyperlinked.
Okay, and then over to Gina Frasca. Is that,
Nope, you're just going to use, you're going to make yours available, right? Or do you want to go through it? I'll link it.
all right. So we will move on then to work session, board forum. Anyone from the board have anything for the greater good?
So it looks like Pat had, she asked to do a restart recovery plan, and we went over that earlier in my superintendent report. And then update on grading changes. So Gina did put something together that she's going to review, and then if there's other questions, we can have them at that point.
Could I ask a question about the restart and recovery plan?
Sure.
Or would that be more appropriate under the policies?
I'm sorry, say it again, Karen?
Could I ask a question about the restart
Yes.
and recovery plan?
Yes.
Or would that be more appropriate? We're approving something under policies.
No, you
Should
can,
I-
you can ask.
Yeah, my only question was about the policy references screening of students. And I was just wondering how we are expecting to handle that.
So are
If we
you,
have a solution for that yet, or, you know, I know that we're working towards this plan. And you did say earlier, you know, it will likely be the phase 2 closer to January.
so
But
what,
that, one thing that caught my eye was that a screening of the students.
are you asking how we take their temperature?
Yeah, is that actually occurring currently?
Yes, when they come in the building, we have infrared cameras at 2 locations, and it takes the temperature of everybody as they walk in, including myself, including the staff.
Okay, great. I didn't realize that. Thank you.
Yes. Can we hear Gina?
Hello.
There you go.
Good
Yes.
evening, everyone. I know that a couple board members had some questions about grading and assessment, so I put some slides together, and then Board of Ed, if you have any other questions after that, I'd be happy to answer them. So a couple background, a little context on some grading questions. There was a post that went out on Facebook. We want to fact check some of the information that gave some false, misleading information about some of the changes that we were making this year. So I wanted to clarify that for everyone and make sure everyone is clear. And also I will stay a little bit after the meeting. If anyone wants to join us in the conversation about grading and assessment, I'd be really happy to have representation from the community, parents, former students on that. Grading and assessment is something that we talk about all the time. We started in 2012 talking about what makes kids want to learn and also what motivates kids. And we've had a very similar grading policy for many years. So we've been talking about how we can actually really facilitate learning through that policy. In 2014, we had an entire PD, the year full of PD, that talked about grading and assessment. And we read articles, we talked about why we grade, we really dove into the many facets of grading and assessment. So we've been doing this for quite some time. We've read 2 books as a staff, Rethinking Grading, and also What's Fair is Not Always Equal. We've done book studies, we've done data analysis on grading. So this is, again, something that's not new. The Student Achievement Leadership Team, which you may have heard of, it's the SALT committee. We talk about different policies and we have board representation on that committee. We had Mrs. Chambers was on the committee for a time, and last year Ms. Hannadell was on our committee, so she joined us in a lot of those conversations. So last May, the board adopted a new policy that realigned the grading policy. This is actually a grading system. We used to have a 93 was an A, and we were the only one in the county that had a 93 as an A. And we found that a lot of our high-achieving students were having some mental health issues. And we found that a lot of them were in school-based youth services and stressed out about grades. And we found that they really weren't learning. They were just focused on getting that grade. So we, talking around those pieces, we said that in New Jersey, we have some of the hardest standards. So we wanted to kind of bring it back down to the 90s so that it's more attainable, because we have a lot of students that shoot for that A, and we really wanted to release some of that stress. So that was, again, dialogue that went on for years. So you can see here, it's a little bit more equivalent in the ranges, and this was in the course brochure last year, just so everyone knows. And teachers should be talking about this with their students. So we have the traditional 90 to 100 as an A. We have A pluses and B pluses, and we have 10 10-point ranges for the A category. We have a 10-point range for B. For C, it's also 10 points, and you will see D has 5 points, okay? And the 64 and below is failure. Now, last spring, we had a crisis, and we were looking at data, and we noticed that a lot of students were failing, a tremendous amount. So in the third quarter, we decided that there would be no grade lower than a 50 in a grade book. But an F is an F, okay? So we've done a lot of research, and also through the county, some of the schools actually went to a pass-fail model, which we were not in favor of. So we did have to do that in order for kids to be able to stay motivated, and we didn't want to lose them. We didn't want to lose them. We wanted to keep them learning, and we wanted to keep them engaged. The fourth quarter was even harder. We started losing more students in the learning process, and we made that a 50 for all. So, I hear on Facebook that they said something like we're giving out trophies. It's still an F. So we had to give some safety nets in order for kids to keep learning. I don't know what we would have done if we didn't do that, we would have had a lot of students, you know, in remedial classes, and I don't think our system could support that. So what is the data telling us right now? The data is telling us that right now, as of today, Pinelands has 400 virtual learners. 400. Our number is going up. Actually, it's the opposite of what's happening at Little Egg Harbor. The little ones, you know, they want to come back in. Our students, more and more are going virtual. And we're finding the virtual learners are struggling. They're having a very hard time not having that personal connection with their teacher. On October 13th, which was when we were looking at progress report data, we found that 47% of our students had 1 or more F. That is also a nationwide statistic right now. So we are absolutely in line. This is not what is Pinelands doing wrong. This is we're in a crisis. We're trying to get kids to keep learning, and obviously home environments, and there's so many variables that we're dealing with right now that we really have to consider, you know, how is this happening? And what can we do to support students? Today, we have 37% of our students at the high school with 1 or more F, and 32% at the junior high. And I did talk about how we had to institute the 50. So last week, I believe it was last week, along with many of the stakeholders, the SALT committee, the admin team, if you notice here, we lowered the 55 is the lowest score. And that is very controversial, but I found that most schools in Ocean County are using the 55 or even a 50. The reason we picked 50 as the lowest F that you can get is because it's 10 points. So the ranges are the same. So really look at the column where it says holistic score. And again, we did this in the spring. A 4 is an A 3 is a B, a C is a 2, a D is a 1, and F is a 0. So it's still considered a 0 behind the scenes when we're doing GPA. Here's some scenarios if students are getting lower than a 55. If they get a 35 in the first quarter, a 50 in the second, they need 2 Bs to get the lowest D. We don't want to set our kids up for failure. We want them to keep learning. We want to keep them engaged in the learning process. And this is a practice. It's not a policy. It's a practice that we will be reevaluating according to the data that we receive from students. And you can see the last one also. An F, a D, they would need 2 Cs in order to get a very low D. I have the data, and I will share this out so you can really look at this. I have the data from other schools that you can compare and see what they're doing in other schools, especially in Ocean County. We have some other schools in there as well. And what are we doing? This is a conversation that's going to keep going. This is not something we're stopping today and we're saying this is the, you know, the end all. We have to keep looking at this. So what are we doing? I actually met with the staff today. It was a great conversation. I sent out a survey. I had 14 responses. So people are engaged in that dialogue of how do we keep kids learning and motivated. I'm going to have a Google Classroom, and any of you can join it with lots of articles. We have a book club that is starting about grading, and we're just having those conversations about grading with staff. I will ask for student input on how this is working for them, and we have a community meeting that is set up for November 11th. It's a Zoom at 6 o'clock. So I will also invite you to join the SALT committee. I will be here if you'd like to do that, and there will be a link on this presentation if you'd like to engage in that conversation. Questions from the board?
Actually, I have a question for us.
Sure.
Make sure you're
Tom,
on your mic.
please speak into the
Sorry.
microphone.
Can you hear me now? Good. All right. You said that students are stressed because they're focusing on their grades. Absolutely agree with that.
Some.
But you said that because they're focusing on their grades that you found that they're not learning.
No.
I was just
Some of
curious,
them,
like,
no,
what
some of
data
them
you
are.
have to support
Well,
that.
some students will take courses just for their GPA, and they won't take courses because it's, you know, an elective that may not have a weighted average or something like that. I'm not saying that they're not learning, but sometimes learning is not their focus. The grade is their focus. And that's a generalized statement, but we're hoping they're learning because that is a big focus.
And then I'm sorry, the other question I had is the grading system that you changed. And I hate to show my age, but that looks like almost like the same grading system
It
we
is.
had like 30 years
Yeah,
ago.
it's more traditional and
So I'm just curious, what was the train of thought? Why was it changed
so our
previously?
70 was passing in our old system, 70 was passing. So that was very rigorous, so they had to get a 70 to pass. We really want kids to learn. We don't want them focused on their grade. We're focused on mastering the learning. We find that a lot of students that are getting low grades, the lower their grades, the less motivated they are. So they're not, a lot of kids are not motivated by grades. So you have two ends of the spectrum. You have the ones who really want to get that A, and then you have the ones that, you know what, I'm going to do the least amount. So we want to kind of keep them in that learning process. And that's the conversation that we have to keep having.
You know, it's Kim. Did you want to talk more about the zero controversy a little bit about the
There's
psychology?
so much research on the fact that a zero is a weapon and a punishment for children. We are trying to avoid that. They also can never get out from under a zero. They need so many perfect scores to, and honestly, then it just becomes a race to try to fix that problem instead of going back to the learning. What are the kids learning? So the zero, I can send you tons of articles. Well, Kim has engaged in that conversation with us in the SALT committee, and we talked a lot about how the zero totally disengages learning.
I have one question. So if a student doesn't do their work for their assignments as part of their education, they still get...
So we're going away from the word assignment because really everything's an assessment, right? We're going away from compliance, like, okay, here, do this worksheet, give it back to me, here's a grade. It's really about let's assess to see what you learned. So if a student is not being assessed and we don't have evidence of their assessment, we have a process that we have in place with student success teams in both buildings that can help the teachers to make sure that they're getting the evidence that they need to see if students are learning. Does that make sense?
Well, how do you assess somebody that's not doing the work?
Then we have a bigger problem. So, and that's something we're talking about. And that was the post that was on Facebook. My child can do one assignment and this child can do 20 assignments, and that was misrepresented to the public.
Well, I don't know who's representing the public. I'm stating what you're saying here tonight.
Right.
And, you know, we have a grading system, and if somebody doesn't do the work, they automatically get a 55.
So again, it's the assessment. We have to make sure the students are engaging in the learning and assessment process.
I understand.
And honestly, it's a great point because there are students that don't engage in that process. So we have to do something about that. And you know, we're working on strategies on how to help the teachers get the students to say, hey, you know, we worked on textual evidence. I didn't get your evidence for that. I really need that in order to assess you. So these are the conversations that are changing in the classroom.
And Gina, to Mr. Williams' point, if you're talking about like a traditional grade book and the student didn't hand in the assignment, so in the past they would get a 0, which is an F. Now they're getting a 55, which is an F. So it's still an F, but what Gina was trying to say was, let's just say they missed 4 assignments and got 55s on all of those. It's easier for them to climb out of that on the next assignments after that. If they get all A's, it's easier to bring their average up. Whereas some students, when they got 0s, it was very difficult to ever come out of that. And they would say, mid-marking period, I've gotten all these zeros. I'm never digging out of this hole. What's the point in even doing work the rest of the semester?
Which leads to behavior issues, mental health issues, and that spiral keeps going around.
But I do know they're still given the opportunity to make up the work.
Absolutely.
And I think if we're not making them do the work, we're setting them up for failure because
No,
they
we
are
are.
still given
No, we're definitely.
the opportunity to make the work
We
up.
are definitely
Yeah.
engaging them as much as we can, especially the virtual learners who are very hard to engage. And that's our problem. We don't see them all the time, so we're trying to, get that conversation going so that we can get some of these assessments and have, grades in the grade book. But we wanted to make it more traditional so that parents could understand it. And parents have a big role in this because grading is communication. That is telling the student how they're doing, it's telling the teacher how they're doing, and it's also telling the parent how they're doing. So we want to make sure that grade reflects learning. Does that make sense?
So I have a question, Karen?
Hi, Karen.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yep.
Yeah, so appreciate the dialogue on grading. From my perspective, it sounds like there certainly has been given a lot of thought, and I definitely can appreciate the concept of a student feeling like, they're so far deep in a hole you can't dig out halfway through the marking period. But when you shared your statistics of 37% at the high school and 32% of the students at the junior high have at least one F.
That was with the 55.
That's with the 55.
Yes.
To me, that says it's a motivation problem. Doesn't matter what the grade is, whether the grade is a 55 or a grade is a 0. It's not a grading problem, it's a motivation problem.
Right.
And how to make sure that the students are engaged. And I can appreciate with virtual learning, it is much more difficult. But when you talked about next steps, it seemed like it was still next steps about the grading and how we're going to do that. I would be curious to hear if you're considering any more dialogue about are there practices we can change?
And that's exactly what we're doing, Karen.
To improve the motivation.
That's exactly what we're doing. We're working on that classroom motivation. The teachers made absolutely amazing connections with our students the first month of school. Even the virtual learners were connected. I was in a virtual lesson with actually a virtual teacher with their students. So we had the virtual teacher with their students in the media center and their other students at home, and the learning was happening beautifully. So again, it's making those connections with the students, and we've really focused in on that. And different strategies are being implemented to make sure students are connected with their teacher and motivated to learn. And we find the more they're connected with their teacher, the more engaged they are in the learning process. And I invite anyone to have this dialogue. It's very deep work. It's a lot of research. There's a lot of data that we look at, but we really enjoy it. And it's something that, especially at the high school level, hasn't really been implemented. So we're looking at learning, and that's our focus.
So with 1/3 of our students failing, having at least 1/3 of our students have at least one F.
Yes.
Right, that's not a success story.
No, and again, it's a national issue too. So, we are not alone. So we're looking for ways every day to rectify that and get the kids to school and get them learning.
Yeah.
So if you have any other questions, anybody can email me. Again, please join the SALT committee. We'd love to have you.
I have a couple questions before we leave, Gina, if you don't mind.
Sure.
I'm just curious, what are some of the ideas that some of the come up with as far as how to assess some of these students? It must be a monumental task.
It is.
What are some of the things that the teachers have come up with that they feel have recently maybe are going to help target some of these students?
And we have, in both buildings, we have a student success team, which is an umbrella over the intervention teams, the resiliency teams, like all of the teams that are looking at the student and all of the ways to support students. So our intervention specialists at both the the high school and the junior high are helping the teachers with their best practice to help, the student. And I think that that's the piece, Pat, that we really have to practice. We haven't presented this to the board yet, but we are starting a new model of how to deal with behaviors. And I don't know what that is. So we actually have, we're using the CPS model, which is collaborative proactive solutions. So we're getting together as teams to discuss how we can best support students. And we find that this new model that we're implementing, and Mrs. Nass and Dr. Clark will be presenting to you on that, we're finding that teachers that are connecting with students are sharing their practices with the other teachers, like, oh, Sammy's not doing anything in my class. Well, wait a minute, she's fine for me. And that's where they're having those conversations. Sammy, I know you would never do that. So again, we're looking, we have so many great things happening right now with the staff and sharing those best practices. So we will keep you posted on the student progress, because it is something that we are very concerned about.
Is the committee you mentioned the same thing as the INRS committee?
That is underneath the umbrella of student success. That is one of the teams underneath that.
Okay, because I think it's important. We hold our teachers to a very high standard and making them accountable. And also, I think that we need to hold the kids accountable as well. And it concerns me if they don't hand anything in at all. There's a problem, but
it wouldn't get to that point, Pat. If we saw that in the middle of the marking period, which is kind of right around now, we would be already contacting, all of the support teams, whether it is the CST person or also the INRS team, or whoever would really support that student. So that would already have happened. It wouldn't get to the point where they hadn't done anything. If that is the case, the wheels are in motion for that student.
just two more inquiries, if you don't mind. The beginning of the meeting, we saw some of the benchmark scores at the beginning of the school year, which I understand, hopefully they're going to move upward. And a lot of it is impacted by what the students went through last year at the last third or quarter of the year. What do you see, or how will this affect our assessment in March? With those students that we're not assessing, or we can't assess.
So that's a great question, and I'm going to be reporting to the board on all of those, the progress checks on our baseline assessments, and then the assessments, the common assessments that come after that. So we will talk about that, but we're actually finding, which is very interesting, this happened yesterday, we had 2 students that were referred to the INRS team. They're failing their class. We looked at their test scores. They are meeting standards. So there's a disconnect of what they've learned and what they're doing in class. And I do agree that it could be a motivation issue that we have to drill into. So I will be giving you updates, and we will watch to see. I am very confident that the students will grow on those assessments because of what's happening in each and every one of our classrooms.
Okay, just the last inquiry I have, we passed that new policy in May.
Yes.
The grading system. And now that there is a change, and I don't know how long it's for, does the policy need to be updated?
This is a practice. This is not a policy. This is a part of a practice. And actually, we do not even have to approve the grading policy as per New Jersey school boards. It is something I wanted to be transparent about with the board, but it's not something required. So that is a local decision.
A 26-24, and
Yes.
does it match with the practice?
Yeah.
Or what's being implemented right now?
So the practice can change on how we're implementing this. And that's, again, according to student data and what the data is telling us.
My question was, does it need to be amended?
No.
Which week?
No.
Okay. All right, thank you for your answers. Thank
No
you.
problem.
Thank you
Yeah.
for putting it on the agenda.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you for your
Yeah,
questions.
I would just like to say, Gina, I know you and the teachers it's got to be a difficult time right now for the students, the parents, the teachers. So thank you for looking so closely at this issue and trying to come up with changing practices to adapt to our new environment here. So appreciate the effort from you and the others involved.
Thank you. Thank you
Thank
so
you,
much.
Karen.
And on behalf of the SALT committee, who I have 35 members, thank you all for the continued conversation.
Okay, anybody else from the board have anything under board forum?
No, I just think Karen hit the nail on the head with that. It might be a motivational issue. Maybe that's where it should be.
All righty. I just have one quick thing. Last month, I read off some of the code of ethics for school board members. I read 5 of them. I was going to read the other 5 tonight, but in light of saving some time, I'll save that for our next month's meeting. Just a general reminder of how we're supposed to behave and conduct ourselves as a board. All right, moving on then to new business. Under new business, we have item 9B1, a motion to affirm the withholding of an increment related to grievance number 20-003 as discussed in executive session on October 28th, 2020. Can I have a motion, please?
Motion.
Second.
Any questions? Mr. Williams? Ms. Poplakua?
Yes.
Ms. Chambers?
I'm going to abstain since I've only just received that information by email this evening.
Ms. Palladino is absent. Mr. Rossetti?
Yes.
Ms. Harper?
Yes.
Mr. Dalio?
Yes.
Ms. Hannadel?
Yes.
Mrs. McVeigh?
Yes.
That motion carries.
All righty, any old business that we need to chat about? All right, moving on to item number 10, Residents Forum for agenda items only. Board Policy 0167 encourages community participation in every meeting. However, the board requests that the public respect a reasonable time limit when commenting on agenda items only. Anyone from the public wish to speak about agenda items?
I just had a question for clarification on the grading that was just talked about. Sorry, Joanna Bartlett, 11 White Oak Lane. Mrs. Frasca had just said from the material up there that no assessment could have a grade, and then yet Mrs. McCooley said that ultimately they end up being 55s. So I'm just curious as if the assessment is not done, if it actually is not graded at all, or if it gets a 55. If you get to the end of the marking period and you've worked hard at trying to get everybody's assessment ends, but ultimately the assessment is not in for a student, do they get a 55, or does it just not count and you're dividing by like 8 or 9 grades instead of 10 or whatever it might be? Okay, so they are getting a grade. So everybody's still, basically when you're looking at it mathematically, everybody is still being divided by however many amount of grades it is. Well, right, of course. Of course, right.
And I think my point was really to Mr. Williams, whether it's 55 or a 0, it's going to factor as an F.
Right. No, I understand that. It's just the way that the grading stuff sounded like was that they would just not be assessed on that at all. That just wouldn't happen, and there would just be no grade, and the divisor that you would be dividing your grades by would be different. So, thank you.
Gina, just so the public can hear you, and there's a microphone right here that is on. Okay, great. Thank you. Any other questions from the public?
Hi, Laura Erper, 205 Flax Court. I just have a follow-up question on that and a comment on the grading practice. I'm glad it's called a practice because it just seems like we're lowering the bar, and I am concerned about that. So a 65 now is passing versus a 70, is that right? We changed from 65?
Yes, so we were one of the only schools in the county that had the 70 as passing. Most schools in Ocean County are either a 65 or a 60. So we did do that comparative data. And we wanted the ranges to be a little bit more equal, if that makes sense. We wanted the 10 points, the 10 points, the 10 points, to make sure it's equitable when it comes to, how to get an A, how to get a B.
Okay, and I would just echo the other comments of the board members that said that maybe we're jumping the gun and maybe remedial, and motivational things should be tried first.
We are working on that. That's happening. Remediation, we have so many kids that are identified. We have action plans. Our teams are hard at work. Every day we're getting new kids that we're supporting in a multitude of ways.
And the score, the quoted figure was 47%, wasn't it, for students that had at least one F?
47, yes.
47%.
So, and nationwide, we're around 47 as well, 48, I think it is.
Okay. And the same question I have as Mrs. Bartlett, the grading system. So how do you provide equity to those students that are handing in every assignment? How do you equalize
So our
that?
mission statement is personalized learning. Every student is different. So really they're on their own learning journey. So we're trying to get away from the one-size-fits-all model and really focus on every individual student and what their own learning journey is. I know that that's very outside the box, but that is the goal, because some students need acceleration, some students need remediation. So really every single student, what Johnny's doing and what Gina's doing are two different things, and that needs to be more accepted, especially at the high school level, because every student learns differently and is, it's hard to have one scale that, encapsulates learning for every single student.
Right, I'm just concerned that the benchmark may be moved.
The benchmark is going to be extreme. The benchmark assessments that are actually linked to the agenda, watch those scores. That's where you're going to see the improvement. Watch the scores in ELA and math, and you will see the improvement on the standards. And we have to start looking at that.
Okay, and I'm just concerned for the students, the high achieving students, the accelerated students, that we don't demotivate them at the same time.
So they actually are our AP students. We actually, this year, I'm so proud to say, and we haven't announced this, we have almost 250 AP students in our high school, and almost 500 exams being taken in the spring, which we've never gotten to that point. So even with this COVID environment, we have students taking 4 and 5 AP classes, which a very rigorous schedule in the high school. So when I tell you our kids are learning and they are not, slacking off, those high-performing students are taking on everything, not to mention they're all in every single student activity that you can name. So they're doing
great.
amazing.
All right, let me Gina, I really appreciate you answering questions. The questions should be directed at the superintendent,
I'm sorry.
though. That's okay. This is not designed for a back and forth, and Gina has offered to meet with anybody after tonight's meeting to further discuss, but all questions should be directed to the superintendent. Thank you.
Okay, and I have another question regarding agenda item, what Dr. McCooley reviewed of the numbers. I quickly multiplied 395 times 220. I got 86.9. Was that reflective of your salary, or?
It's 240 days.
240
Yes.
days? Okay, gotcha. And the goals and the achievements, accomplishments set out on this document here, are they related to the strategic plan, or are they related to your goals and objectives?
So as I stated earlier, they're related to each one of those standards, and that's how I'm evaluated each year.
Okay, so you don't have a separate set of goals and objectives for the superintendent?
I do have merit goals.
You do? Okay. That would be something different?
Yep.
Than what's stated here?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else have a question on an agenda item? How about in virtual land? Do we have anybody who would like to ask a question about agenda items? We normally give it a few seconds here to make sure if there's anyone at home that has a question.
What's different this time from past is the number and passcode has been on the screen all this entire meeting.
Okay. All right, then we'll move on to committee reports. Instructional. May I have a motion, please, to approve items A1 through A6?
Motion.
Second.
Are there any questions? Okay, roll call vote. Mr. Williams? Yes. Ms. Poklakua?
Yes.
Ms. Chambers?
Yes.
Ms. Palladino? I'm sorry, Ms. Palladino is absent. Mr. Rossetti?
Yes.
Ms. Harper?
Yes.
Mr. Dalio?
Yes.
Ms. Hannadel? Ms. Hannadel, can you hear me?
Sorry, it wasn't unmuting. Yes.
Thank you. The motion carries.
May I vote, please?
Oh, I'm sorry, Mrs. McVeigh. Your
Yes.
vote, please.
Yes.
Confirming that that motion carries. My apologies.
That's okay. Items, moving on to personnel. May I have a motion, please, to approve items B1 through B13?
Motion.
Second.
Roll call vote. Mr. Williams?
Is there any discussion?
I'm sorry, any questions?
Yeah, I have a question. Actually, I need some clarification if you don't mind. Item number 11, coaching assignments for winter, and the resolution, the way it's stated there. I need to ask for some clarification on the meaning and the interpretation of that statement. If you could please do that. I think it's a little ambiguous, but please, can somebody please explain that? And well, first let me get that answer first. Go ahead. It states that the Board of Ed approves coaching recommendations, blah, blah, blah. Stipends are pending sufficient student participation, commencement, and completion of the athletic season.
So if there's a coach and there are players and they're practicing and the season, and they have students that are participating the entire season, we feel that it was commenced and it was completed.
So we added that because, right, to make sure that we had students participating.
Right.
So does it mean that students need to participate from the beginning of the season, at the commencement, through the end, which is the completion, for the entire period? That's what I need. Is that the interpretation of this?
So we never set a bottom line number, like how many students need to be on the team or anything like that, but as long as there's a coach and there's players, they would get the stipend.
But if they're not able to fulfill a schedule, and the schedule has been canceled, let's say, so they don't play any games.
Wait, what?
That was never discussed. We never said they had to play games. I know what you're referring to is the tennis situation.
And that's why I need the interpretation.
Yep, they are practicing, and they were actually playing today. When you pulled up here, they were actually
a whole
playing.
bunch out there. A lot of girls out there.
Yeah, there was a lot out there.
So what's the controversy?
I don't know. I thought if we didn't have enough players for a team, we didn't have the team. And that they would either play up, like typically in the past it had been, we didn't have enough freshmen to field a freshman team, and then there was not a freshman team, there was not a freshman coaches, but they were eligible to play on the JV team, for example. This is a different scenario?
This is a different scenario because they're still on the JV team, and the coach that we approved was the varsity assistant, not the JV coach. So they're still a varsity team, and the JV players are still practicing every day with both coaches, and then at the end of the varsity game, because the similar situation's happening in other school districts, those JV players get to play. It's not a recorded score, but they are getting to play.
You're scrimmaging.
Right, it's like a scrimmage.
So is there a procedure in place for determining when the program, whether it be athletic or it could even be an extracurricular program, is there something in place to determine when that program will not run then, based on the resolution?
We never set a bottom line number. Like if there's 2 kids that entered a chess club or something we were still going to run it because we want kids involved in things. You know, we're in the middle of a COVID crisis, we've, cut the kids' school down in half. We want them to be involved in different things, and, eliminating an activity is not really in their best interest.
Is there only 2 kids, or is there actually a lot of kids anyway, and this is not really an issue?
No, I was just using that hypothetically. There are, I don't know the exact number of JV girls, but I know there's more than 2.
Oh, and I just know that they haven't been able to play a schedule all season, so it's been canceled. So that's why I needed to ask for an interpretation of the meaning of the resolutions that we pass on all the coaching stipends. I think it's ambiguous. Maybe it needs to be taken a look at, because in my mind, the way it's stated here is that we have to have a sufficient student participation at the commencement through the completion of the program. And it doesn't seem to be happening right now on that level, based on the fact that they didn't complete in any JV matches. They were all canceled.
Well,
So-
we never said they had to play an actual game either. And we do have participation, we do have a coach, they're practicing every day, and they get to participate at the end of the varsity games. It was never stated that it has to be an actual match on a schedule.
Okay, Pat, there are some board members here that might want to ask a question, so I'm going to allow some of the sitting board members at the actual meeting to ask. Tommy, did you have a question?
Yes.
Make sure you're speaking
Is your
into
mic
the
on,
mic.
Tom?
I thought it was, okay. The
Thank
young
you.
lady that was here, the legal representation a couple months ago, said specifically that's why that wording was put in, so that, because I had asked the question if we had enough kids to participate in all these different athletic activities and everything, and we were told then as a board that that's why this last sentence was added. And that was a couple of months ago. I don't know what this situation really is, but that's what.
So I guess it would give, and Will, you can jump in, I guess it would give the board the opportunity to say it's not enough, but are you saying as a board member and Ms. Chambers that you don't think there's enough JV participation and you want to eliminate that sport?
No, I'm not saying that at all. I'm just saying, based on what I have to vote on this evening for the winter sports, it's very confusing now because of some of the things that I did email you about. Because in my mind, this interpretation means that there has to be sufficient participation from the beginning until the end of the season. I mean, at this point in time, it's too late. I mean, you can't do that to these kids. No, but we had this put in place because of situations and issues we've had in the past prior to you coming, yes, okay, because we didn't have enough players for a particular freshman sport or whatever it was, and the coaches still got paid.
Okay.
But we never played freshman matches.
Will, do you want to explain that a little bit? I think
We're
Will's
going to let Will speak here, please. Go
Yeah,
ahead,
sure. And it's been our office's recommendation that school districts, and all the school districts that we represent, take a look at the language they have with regards to the prospective appointment of people. Okay, I'm not going to really speak of the retrospective, that is what occurred, but prospectively based on a number of factors. First, the absolute uncertainty of what's going on in the world. Okay, no one could have foreseen what was going to be ordered as of March 18th, okay? And no one, I think, could have foreseen how long that would have been. And I think, I know lawyers make, and I've done this well myself, make a fool of themselves when they try and predict what's going to come in the next several months. So because of a number of situations that have occurred throughout the state regarding stipends and legislation that was passed by the legislature, and what I would suggest, and it is my opinion, rather hurried fashion, that said, with regards to somebody's entitlement to salary, emoluments, and what have you, as if school was still in session, there were some arguments in other communities as well that people were entitled to stipends for things that did not occur. And the recommendation, I think, that came from school boards and concurred by our office is to make it clear a stipend is just the fact that somebody is appointed to a stipend position is not the end of the discussion. That is, there has to be sufficient student participation, and I would defer to the administration as to when is that going to occur, because I think that's running the schools, not ensuring that they're well run. That's running the schools. Say, okay, for this activity, and I'll use chess club. My son was in the chess club at his school, and yeah, there were only 6 kids. But it didn't take more than 6 kids to make an effective chess club because only 5 actually competed at any one time to begin with. So that might be a very valid and viable source, especially for students who might not be involved in other. When it comes to other athletic events, it might make sense to have the teams compete and scrimmage without an official designation of this is this team or this is that team, especially right now because a lot of schools aren't fielding freshman teams, JV teams. They're just not fielding them, but the students still want to go out and participate. And how do you foster? We talked about grades, we talked about involvement. How do you foster as much involvement of the students? And then finally, also to be good stewards of the public's interest to say, hey, you know, if for some reason or another, and I hope this doesn't come to pass, and I'm almost afraid to actually articulate the words, we're shut down again in full by the state, and then these winter seasons, again, it upsets me to even think, if they don't occur at all, you know, there have been arguments made by very large associations that once the appointment was made, that the entitlement to that stipend occurred right at that juncture. And I think this is also coming, that's also factoring into the recommendation that we're making with regards to that language.
Well, I think at this time, it's kind of hard with COVID to really make a determination. How can you gauge that? You know, like finishing out a full season, because you don't know what the future is. So just 2 quick things. What is the stipend anyway? That they, because obviously this deals with the girls' tennis. That's what it seems like. It's a tennis issue.
It's the JV assistant, it's the varsity assistant.
Okay, is it okay to note what the stipend is?
It's about $4,000.
$4,000 for the season, okay. So they're coaching these kids. When I drove by for an earlier meeting, there was a lot of girls with Pinelands uniforms on. So I don't know what they are, if they're JV, if they're varsity, I have no idea, but there was a lot of them out there with coaches. So they're doing something out there. I think 4,000, you know, in this situation is really not important. Is the kids getting out there and having an opportunity to bond with their students, their fellow students.
And also when you talk about motivation or lack thereof in grading, some of
thank
these
you.
kids, some of our athletes, their only motivation for academics, which they might not be, not all of them, of course, but I could speak to my son who was an athlete. His grades, we stayed on top of them because he wanted to play. So that's certainly something that plays into a factor to the bigger picture.
I think the other thing too is that if you have 4 girls playing JV now, they're getting practice time and they're competing at whatever level they can, next year they're going to be your varsity players. And if, heaven forbid, somebody gets injured and somebody has to move up, I think it's always wise of us, but particularly now, as Rachel said, to invest in every aspect of education. And I firmly believe that being involved in sports is a part of education. You're learning how to be a team player, you're learning how to take direction. There's so many things that youth sports can foster and give a child a skill set that'll allow them to succeed in the classroom as well. So I would always come down on the side of having kids involved in extracurricular activities, no matter what it is. Any other questions on these items?
Can I just make a comment? I just think that to Will's point, this was to make sure that we were not having no one doing anything and getting paid for it, because that was kind of the problem in spring. So this is a totally different issue. It's not, I mean, I hear Pat's point that they had this issue before, but this is about COVID. This is not about, participation, particularly, and we need our kids, like everyone has said, we need our kids to be involved.
Okay, thank you, Kim. Any other questions about?
Clarification, Will, because I think it's ambiguous the way it's stated here and we have to vote on it. But I appreciate that. Appreciate you listening to my comment. And maybe in the future it needs to be taken a look at as far as what procedures are in place for these different stipends on determining when the program will or will not run.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Pat. All right, there's a motion on the floor for items B1 through B13. Any other questions?
Yes, I just have a quick clarification question. Let me get to it's item 4A. the salary adjustment. So this was an individual that was just hired. I just wanted a clarification question that I'm not familiar enough with the two different secretarial guides. This does not change in any way. I can see that the salary is not changing. This is still, it's not changing from a 12 to a 10-month position. There was no intention of that. If you could please confirm.
Confirmed.
Okay, good, thank you.
Thank you, Karen. Any other questions?
Okay, roll call vote. Mr. Williams?
Yes, excluding B3, I will abstain. And just a statement on the coaching thing, that if we can look to make sure that we are ensuring that there's enough participation in the upcoming winter athletics.
Thank you. Ms. Paklakua?
Yes.
Thank you. Ms. Chambers?
Yes.
Mr. Rossetti?
Yes.
Ms. Harper?
Yes.
Mr. Dalio?
Yes.
Ms. Hannadel?
Yeah.
Thank you. Mrs. McVeigh?
Yes.
Motion carries.
All right, moving on to operations. May I have a motion, please, for items C1 through C6?
Motion.
Second.
Any questions?
Okay, roll call vote. Mr. Williams?
Yes.
Ms. Paklakua?
Yes.
Ms. Chambers?
Yes, but I will abstain on item C1 and C2 this evening.
Mr. Rossetti?
Yes.
Ms. Harper?
Yes, with an abstention on 3B.
Noted. Mr. Dalio?
Yes.
Ms. Hannadel?
Yes.
And Mrs. McVeigh?
Yes. Moving on to item D, report of the board secretary, business administrator. May I please have a motion to accept items D1 through D12, is it? Or
Yes.
13?
Yes.
12? Okay. Motion, please.
Motion.
Second.
Any questions?
Nick, I would just like to, I don't know if item 12 is new this year, but I appreciate it being available to the board, and it seemed very well put together, so thank you for that. I know we've asked about some of our procedures years prior, before you came on board, so that was just very nice to see. Thank you.
No problem. And just so you know, too, we will be, after we get back from the week off next week, we'll also conduct our annual purchasing training with the staff. And because we instituted a new accounting software this year, we want to make sure that everybody's familiar with any updates to the purchasing process in the district as well. So we'll cover all that with the staff when we get back.
I have a question on the bills list, Nick. I did post the question on the Q&A regarding our mental health service provider, and it was for an estimated PO bill. Was the figure that was there that we're approving tonight, is that actually the amount that we're being billed for the month of September? I don't believe that was answered in the Q&A.
I don't have that invoice in front of me, but I'll follow up with you after the meeting and confirm. It's likely covered the period to maybe the middle of October, but I'd want to look at the invoice and confirm that.
All right, because I do know the provider was hired on an hourly rate, and the figure that was there, if it's just for the month of September, it's rather extraordinary and high. And I wasn't sure about what we're calling an estimated PO. Is it up to that amount every month, or it didn't make sense to me?
He's per diem, and he's paid through Title I funds. He does a timesheet.
Yeah, I mean, so if we were to get to a point in the year where the total amount of money on that PO needs to be changed, it would be, but that's going to be a function of how many students through the Title I program need service.
Thank you.
No problem. Any other questions? All right, roll call vote. Mr. Williams?
Yes, and I'll abstain on PO 2100449 at this time.
Thank you. Ms.
On the bills
Paklakua?
list. on the
sorry.
bills list. On the bills list.
Yep, I got you. Ms. Baklakua?
Yes.
Ms. Chambers?
Yeah, everything's a yes, except the item that I questioned, that PO item, 2100449.
Does Ms. Chambers have to abstain on contracts and agreements, the cops in schools, the SOA, if her son-in-law is an SRO?
He's not an SRO.
Chief Busby said he's the lead, that we are supposed to go to him with any SRO concerns, so he would be the lead SRO.
But it's not his title within the Little Lake Harbor Police Department.
If he's
He's
gonna
not, that's not his title. He's an actual lieutenant of the Little Lake Harbor Police Department. But if I have to abstain, if Will feels I need to do that, I will.
It's always the safer course of action. This way there's no question. So I would suggest that without knowing more.
I don't know what item that is on the agenda, but Nick, if you would have
9A.
allowed me to abstain from that particular number.
Yes, ma'am, it's item 9A and the abstention is noted.
Okay, thank you very much.
No problem. Ms. Palladino? Oh, she's absent, sorry. Mr. Rossetti?
Yes.
Ms. Harper?
I'm going to abstain on D1 through D6, and yes to D7 through 12.
Thank you. Mr. Dalio?
That'd be yes.
Ms. Hannadel?
Just leave it on.
Ms. Hannadel?
It says it's not.
We hear you.
You do hear me? Oh, I said yes.
Okay, thank you. Mrs. McVeigh?
Yes.
Thank you. That motion carries.
We'll move on to item number 12, please. Residents Forum on general topics. Board Policy 0167 encourages community participation in every meeting. However, the board requests that the public respect a reasonable time limit when commenting on any topic. Anyone from the public wish to address the board on general topics? Is there anyone in?
I think she's going up.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
Hi, Laura Erber, 205 Flax Court. Just regarding the board decorum and protocol, I'm not sure why I was asked not to speak to an administrator with a presentation that she gave tonight after the fact that I spoke to her. Is that protocol or?
Yes, it's protocol not to have it back and forth, and that questions be addressed either to the board president or to the superintendent.
Okay, well, I would ask that you would maybe interject a little bit sooner instead of after the fact and correct me as if I did something wrong.
I'm very sorry if that was perceived. I wasn't trying to make you feel that way. I was just, I was lapsed in not saying something sooner. I was thinking it would be a question and that would be all right.
Yeah, because it was very helpful. I appreciated the back and forth. So it's kind of discouraging to the public if you're going to make those kind of comments.
And it's not a comment that I made. It's an actual policy. There is not to be a back and forth. Almost what we're doing right now is against policy. There's not to be a back and forth. There's to ask a question, and then the question is answered.
How do you communicate without going back and forth? What policy would that be?
Yeah, sure. And good evening. And first and foremost, I want to make it very clear, it's the Board of Education's policy. The Board of Education's policy to encourage public communication, to encourage the public to seek and ask questions during the meeting. That's why it has two resident forums, one about agenda items, one after. The reason why it's not normally a back and forth is first and foremost, it's not always productive to do that, in particular for a Board of Education, trying to answer questions on the fly. Rather, it's more productive to take questions from the public and direct them to the Chief School Administrator, which is their ethical responsibility first and foremost. Ask the Chief School Administrator to investigate, respond as appropriate. During a presentation, the problem that comes about with a back and forth, and we're engaging in back and forth, and normally I would just ask, are you finished with all your questions? Because then I would respond. But the problem with the back and forth is not so much answering one person's question, it's answering one person's question and not answering another person's question. And then that creates all sorts of complex issues with regards to who is getting some type of favored treatment from the Board of Education. Wait a second, I asked a question about this individual or these scores or what have you, but then I asked a question about a teaching staff member, and then the board says, we can't answer that because we don't deal with personnel. And then there is case law that says, wait a second, you are picking and choosing the viewpoints of the questions that you want to answer. That's not okay for a Board of Education to do. What it should do is give everyone an equal footing.
But the public comes here for questions to be answered.
Well, the public comes here first and foremost. Let me make it very clear. Under the Open Public Meetings Act, is very much expressed at the time that it was adopted and every single time it's ever been amended. It's the public's opportunity to hear and see what's occurring and then to address the board and ask that they investigate those items. It's really not about the public participating per se in the meeting. And I would suggest to you that that's very true at every level of government. I would suggest to you at most municipal bodies, there's not generally a back and forth that goes on. There's a question that's asked. They say, okay, we'll take it on advisement and we'll get back to you. It's very true at almost every elected body above that. That is, thank you, next question, thank you, and that's only when they're holding their hearing. And that's not to diminish the public's concerns in any manner whatsoever. It's to understand that there's a diverse public with many different viewpoints who all may have questions, all of which are much more likely productively responded to if they're directed to the chair directs the chief school administrator to respond if appropriate, and if not, to then suggest that there's a good time to then meet so that answers can be given. This is in no manner, and I want to make this very clear, and I want the minutes to reflect this, in no manner is it with the idea of discouraging public address to the board. It is about allowing as much public address to the board so that it doesn't become a back and forth session, except in those very limited circumstances where that's warranted.
Okay, well, I've had other experiences with other boards of education, and they do freely answer questions. So I'd just like to know what policy you're referring to.
See, that's the problem. And when you say something, well, I've been in front of other boards of education where they answer questions like, well, I don't think there were any questions that weren't answered. And that's the problem. It goes back and forth and back and forth. It's, here are your questions. Our obligation is to direct them to the chief school administrator, provide a response if it's appropriate at the time. As you heard also from the business administrator, sometimes it's, we're going to have to go get that information for you.
I know, but I think I heard you say that there should not be a back and forth between the board and the public. Is that what you said?
I said that I believe that's not productive because once you step aside and then the next person comes up and they want to start a back and forth.
That's the whole purpose of me showing up here, though, that I could participate.
Well, so that you can address the board.
Yes.
Address.
And participate.
Okay,
What's the board policy that you're referring to? I'm sorry.
I'll have to get back to you on that policy.
Okay. Okay, and one more point of board decorum I'd like to address, which happened last month, where Mr. DeLeo had spoken about a fellow board member, I believe, very inappropriately in a public session, and to disparage a fellow colleague and a board member without him even being present was very distasteful. And I just like to know.
It's his choice to show up.
I just like to know what the board's
Not against you right now.
board's reaction to that was. We didn't get to comment afterwards.
I appreciate your comment. Anyone else like to address the board?
So I'm not going to get an answer on that tonight.
I didn't hear the question. What was it?
The question was how the board felt about that issue being brought up.
I spoke openly.
With a
in
fellow
front-
board
Well,
member.
I'm going to answer it right now for you. I spoke openly and transparently to the public, my concerns. And I think,
Right.
to some point they're addressed.
Would that have been better off in executive session? That's what.
No,
my-
I think a
my
lot of
question-
people ask for transparency only when it suits their agenda. I spoke publicly so everyone can hear it. I wasn't hiding anything.
Oh, no agenda here, but I just thought it was
You're just telling me
distasteful.
what I should do as a board member behind closed doors.
If I was a member on this board, I would be very concerned if a fellow board member did that to me without a chance to respond, especially when the absences may have been for medical reasons. Thank you.
Okay, you're welcome. Thank you.
All right. Okay,
You have two callers.
go ahead. We're going to take the two callers that are online first, so just a second. Thank you.
Go ahead, whoever's online.
Caller number one, number 609-713-6984. Please state your name and address and address the board. Thank you.
Yes, my name is Christine Snyder, 7 Lippincott Drive, Little Egg Harbor, New Jersey. I'm calling, I just wanted to comment, and forgive me if any of this was discussed already during the board as a whole. I was at a meeting with my daughter. But I would like to discuss just the thought process, and I realize you might not comment back, about the new grading scheme and how that's going to apply to courses that are being offered as dual credit along with the academies of Ocean County College, because those students are going to be receiving college credits for those courses, and the fact that they might not have to turn in all the assignments that a college level student who is taking that same course would receive credit for seems to mean that, A, we're doing those students a disservice, along with making it slightly not as rigorous as it would be at the collegiate level. Additionally, I think there's other services that we could consider to provide outreach for students who are at risk. Let's try to be more positive, reach out to those, maybe guidance. I'm not sure if, I tried to look today to see if you're available for Title III funding. That's what OCC offers. They offer an academic coach to reach out to students. They have access to grade books. When students receive zeros for assignments, outreach takes place so that those students can be targeted to receive help. And that's all I just wanted to say. And really, really think about the consequences lifelong for these students by adopting this policy.
So I'm going to address that. It's not a policy, it's a practice, Dr. Snyder, and Gina Frasca is here. We did go over this at length tonight, and she is going to follow up with an email to you to set up a time to speak tomorrow.
Any other question? Okay, thank you.
Caller whose phone number ends in 1547, please state your name and address and address the board. Thank you for calling in.
Patty Martin, 81 West Greenbush Road. I'm in Bass River. I would just like to first off thank the administration, the food service staff, teachers, and basically the entire middle school staff. Your dedication, help, and guidance is very much appreciated during these challenging times. I do have a question, though, regarding Spanish survey. My daughter is in the 8th grade, and she had signed up for it. Then ultimately, when she received her schedule, I guess it was the end of August, we discovered that Spanish was no longer on her schedule. It basically just disappeared. We were wondering what happened to it.
Hi, Mrs. Martin. This is Dr. McCooley, the superintendent. I have your name
Hello.
is Patty Martin, and Ms. Frasca is going to reach out to you to explain the change in the schedule, if that's okay.
Perfect. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Thank you for calling. Anybody else in calling land? Okay, anybody else from the public wish to speak? Sir, please step
I
up.
do not have anyone else in the waiting room.
Thank you.
Hi, Mark Santianes, 210 Marine Street in Tuckerton. This is concerning the merged shared services concerning the districts. And first, I would just like to ask a point of clarification as to a Tier 3 student. I looked it up really quickly online, and I just want to make sure I've got a good definition. Would be a student who's experiencing problems academically, socially, or behaviorally. Is that accurate? Great. Internet's good. Okay. So with that, if the districts are completely merged in shared services, districts such as Eagleswood, Tuckerton, Bass River, Little Egg, all under the Pinelands Regional School District umbrella. First off, will either Tuckerton or elementary schools the buildings be closed, and then students from those elementary schools be sent to other schools such as George J. Mitchell or Frog Pond. And if those schools are closed, if either one or more is closed, will those buildings be repurposed for Tier 3 high school students? Does that make sense?
So it's a great question. It's a loaded question. The purpose of the LEAP grant that Mr. Brown was discussing tonight, we got a $90,000 grant to do exactly what you're asking. So a bunch of people that know much more than we do about shared services and consolidation are going to conduct a very long, very in-depth study, and all of those questions would be answered. So they're going to give us different scenarios, and all that data would be presented to each Board of Education, and then from there, they would make those decisions. But at this point, we're only in the data collection phase. It's going to take some time, and then when that data is ready, we will have public hearings such as this that you would be able to attend to listen to the board discuss all of that data.
I would like to add that the other boards of education have made it clear, and I'd say Eagleswood and Tuckerton, that it is their desire to have those buildings remain open, and the study will be conducted if the feasibility is for them to remain open. I think that's what they would like, and ultimately that's what most of the communities have indicated in the early stages, that the representatives have indicated, is to keep those buildings in use as elementary schools.
And on the committee are each superintendent, a board member, and a business administrator. So we have representation from everywhere.
Any other questions from the audience? All right, seeing none, we'll move on to board forum. This is an opportunity for board members to speak their mind, ask a question, whatever the case may be on any topic. Mr. Rossetti?
Thank the public for coming out this evening. We love community involvement. I just want to thank all the teachers and administration who are still getting us through this virtual learning. I know firsthand what a struggle it is, so hats off to that. And I'd also like to thank Dr. McCooley and the board for our JROTC program. It's just a beautiful thing to hear. You did make one comment that I just wanted to state. You talked about it's expensive, and it just made me think of some of the things that I've heard here tonight. And I'm paraphrasing here, when Mr. Brown was doing his presentation, he talked about, when we were talking about saving money, we talked about benefit to all of our students. And when Mrs. McVeigh was talking about the coaching and stuff, she said always support students being involved in extracurricular activities and investing in every aspect of education. Sorry, wrote it down real fast, paraphrasing. I just wanted to say that, I just think that this is, a wonderful addition to the school, and, you can't put a price on quality education.
Absolutely, and something for everyone.
That's it. Thank you.
Ms. Harper?
No, have a good night, everybody.
Thank you. Mr. Williams?
I would just like to thank everyone for coming out. Mrs. Erber, thank you for your comments. However, they were really not needed, being as I am a big person and respond for myself.
Your mic went off.
And respond for myself. I think what occurred last meeting was poor boardsmanship. Conversation should have occurred privately first and foremost, and then as far as executive session comments, the meeting prior to that one, I had some discussions and some concerns that really were not executive session business, but it occurred in executive session. And the advice of legal counsel, I will stop there. Thank you.
Mr. Dalio?
Yeah, to just thank all the faculty, all the staff. I know you guys are working really hard. So I definitely put my thoughts are into what you're going through with the pandemic. It's not easy. I stand by my statements I made in public. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Dalio. Ms. Chambers, are you with us?
Oh, yes, I'm here. I'd like to thank Melissa for adding the things on the work session that I questioned on the Q&A. I appreciate it. Thank you, Gina, for your presentation. It helped a lot. And everyone have a nice evening. Happy Halloween.
Thank you. Ms. Bakaluka?
Yeah, just thanks to everyone for coming out. We do appreciate hearing the feedback from the public. I would like to thank our staff, the teachers and the admin team and everyone for getting us through this challenging time. And I do want to also throw out a big thank you to our parents too, who I also know it's difficult for them home as well, trying to keep everyone focused on school and trying to get by. So thanks to everyone, and thanks to all for coming out.
Thank you, Karen. Ms. Handadell?
Ditto for all the comments. Thanks to the parents for coming, and more conversation about grading is always really good. And know that they are always working on it, and any input from the parents. And I was wondering, I actually have a question. How many? Is there a limit of how many board members can be on the full committee?
Is there a limit to how long a board member can be on the SALT committee?
Not how long, how many?
I'm sorry.
How many? Well, we have a quorum if we had more than 4.
So more could join if they like. So
Sure.
I'm just going to encourage people to do that as well. And otherwise, everyone have a great night.
Thank you. I'd like to thank my fellow board members. I'm not the perfect person, but I do my very best when I'm sitting up here. My intention is never to be sharp with somebody or to cut somebody off, but there are things that I must do in order to keep the meeting open and moving. I've invited people in the past to contact me, to reach out to me, to speak to me. I would always be happy after a meeting via email, phone call, in person, to chat about things. I'm always open to input. I'd like to say just real quick that the Pinelands community lost a member, Steve Vaux. Recently, he was somebody who was very much involved in the community, in the wrestling program. I've known Steve for over 30 years, him and his family. He was a substitute teacher here after he retired, very involved in sports, and I'd like to offer my sincere condolences to his family, his 2 sons, and to his wife. It's a true loss for our community. With that, a motion to adjourn, please.
Motion.
Second.
All those in favor of adjourning the meeting at 7:57 PM, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you very much. The next regularly scheduled meeting of the Board of Education is Wednesday, November 18th at 5:30 PM. Zoom links will be available, and the meeting will be conducted in here. Have a great evening, everybody.
Thank you.